On today's episode, are deeply religious people good? Was Everything Everywhere All at Once the worst Best Picture winner in the history of the Academy Awards? And were public officials and scientists all purposely trying to mess with our lives during the COVID-19 pandemic? We answer these questions and more on this episode of Good Take, Bad Take. Hello, friends. Welcome to this episode of Good Take, Bad Take. This, of course, is the show where we gather the good and the bad takes from our social media feeds, and we break down what we like or dislike about them and offer, hopefully, interesting commentary while we do it. My name is Donald, and I'm here with my co-host, Britt. Before we get started, just a reminder to give us a follow on all our socials listed on the screen if you're watching. If not, it's Good Take, Bad Take Pod on Instagram and Good Bad Take Pod on Twitter and YouTube. Helps us out a ton. And with that, we'll move on to the takes. So the first one comes from Blake Masters, who was the recent Senate candidate from Arizona who lost to Mark Kelly. And he's, quote, retweeting Michael Schellenberger. Michael Schellenberger tweeting, exclusive. Senator Mark Kelly called for social media censorship to prevent bank runs. Democrats are demanding ever more censorship in a widening social media panic. And Blake Masters, quote, tweeting this says, left-wing Democrats want to blame free speech because bureaucrats and big banks screwed up. When all you've got is a hammer, everything looks like a nail, and their hammer is censorship. So what do you think about this this take here, Britt?
Blake's specifically.
Yes,
right?
Blake's, yeah.
It's kind of interesting. It's I'm going to say it's a okay take, I guess. Like, I think that he could have said more about the banks, and it's because Blake Masters ran as a Republican, if I'm not mistaken. So he could have said a lot more about how the banks and how the whole thing got set up, and how this the entire institution functions to rob the wealth from everyday Americans. But he kind of chose to throw a little bit. It seems a little red meaty. Maybe that's what I'm getting out of it. What do you think?
I kind of thought the same way at first, but I looked at the actual situation he's talking about, and it makes sense that he's going to criticize, an action from Mark Kelly, who he directly ran against, right? And Mark Kelly was literally saying that that social media companies and other forms of censorship were needed to prevent people from spreading panic and going to do bank runs. So Blake Masters' take isn't so much about the whole SVB situation specifically. He's talking about what Mark Kelly, because I saw this take and I thought, oh, maybe this is one we can kind of criticize, from the right. But he's actually dead on here. In that
I should have read the article.
Yeah, the first thing Mark Kelly ran to go do was say, well, we need to make sure that we're not allowing speech that's going to cause people to panic so that they go to their banks and withdraw everything. Like,
yeah, okay. Then it's a pretty good take. I mean,
yeah.
And I think it's like adding on to that, it's like instead rather, and that's to his point, when all you've got is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. It's like Democrats and the people who are in power, instead of like actually fixing the problem, are like, well, let's fix the problem by just taking control and censoring people. So so then it's a fine take. I just take issue sometimes with Republicans. Like, I don't know Blake Masters stuff too much, but I know we've done one or two of his before, but they kind of like think about the stuff that their base would really like, and then they hop on it, not because of principle, but because it's like the talking point of the day. So that's what it originally hit me as when I first read it. It's not wrong, right? It's not wrong by any means.
Sure.
I just thought maybe he could have said a little bit more.
Yeah. Well, no, and the thing that I appreciate about it specifically is it feels like whether you're on, and maybe this is also where it's a little weak. It's only in that he says like, oh, left-wing Democrats want to blame free speech when bureaucrats and big banks screwed up. Maybe in this individual case, but more broadly speaking, just people in power, and this includes populist Republicans, even who aren't specifically in power, they really like to blame free speech on a lot of things. That the idea of, you're not allowed to yell fire in a crowded theater, that's touted by people on the right and the left, and it's objectively wrong. You actually are protected. The First Amendment does protect that. But that's not a politically left thing to say. That's pretty neutrally observed by everyone. And it comes out in different situations. So maybe in this specific case, it is the left-wing Democrats. And I would say, if I had to paint in broad swaths, the left generally is more pro censorship, but the right is not foreign to this concept either. It's a very quick and easy catch-all solution that never works but sounds like it will for problems that are caused by the generally the power centers that the people who want to ban speech are trying to protect.
Yeah, and I guess maybe it's the left wing where he points out about that, because I mean, obviously a Republican didn't say what Mark Kelly was saying specifically, but Republicans have said things like that similar in the past, right? Whether it was about supporting the troops, during the wars, and I know Blake Masters has generally been pretty good on all that stuff. So I don't know. That's what made me think it's red meat, but yeah, I think in principle, when I just look at it in a vacuum, it's a great take,
Yeah.
and it hits the nail on the head.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly right. Okay, we'll move to our next take. This one starts with a tweet that says, "What Christianity opinion would have you like this?" And then it shows the scene from Tangled, where Flynn Rider is sort of standing there, very cavalier looking, and about 1 billion swords are thrust up to his neck. And so there's a reply to this tweet saying, "I've never seen a deeply religious person that is a good human being." What do you think, Britt? Is there an antithesis of good people and deeply religious people?
Yeah, I think I'm going to be one of the swords, unfortunately, in the meme.
Yeah, this proves it. You're not one of the good
it just
people.
proves it. It's a really bad take. One, I mean, obviously on Twitter, any sort of debate limited to however many characters you got is going to be kind of silly. But he has two qualifiers in there that are like up to interpretation: deeply religious and then good. Right. And so no matter how you argue with this person, I would probably just never engage with them, because they're going to be able to shift their definition of what deeply religious is and what good is to suit, kind of the overall theme that they're trying to put out there. So if I said, well, did you know that, most of the private charity that's given, as well, both in like financial goods as well as services and pro bono things and such, are done by religious people, this person would say, well, I'm talking about deeply religious people. And then you could say another definition about what that is, and then they could just keep shifting it. So it's usually not, you usually want to get them to commit to some sort of definition of what deeply religious means, or else they're going to shift it. And likewise, I brought this example up before. My someone I know had their neighbor come up and said, "Hey, why are Christians just so hateful? So unloving?" And this neighbor held the belief, that that Christians were unloving because they wouldn't allow abortions to happen, right? Well, in the Christian faith, we believe that unborn persons are people, so therefore executing them just on a whim, for no reason that other than convenience or just lack of want, is an immoral one, right? And it would be unloving for us to simultaneously hold that view and hold the view that you should be able to have an abortion. So therefore, that person's definition of what is good or what is loving does not match our own. We don't have any really common ground to argue on. So yeah, I think in general, though, if you look at the people who are considered good universally, regardless of whether they're religious, what beliefs they have are factored in, they adhere to the tenets and live up to the tenets of religion, specifically Christian religion, and a lot of Christian Jewish religions, those tenets pretty well. So if that's the definition of what deeply religious is adhering to what is written in the words and texts that we hold sacred, then this person is obviously very wrong.
Yeah, to the point you sort of brought up initially too, the ever shifting definitions means that this stance, unless they can define good in a singular term, it is meaningless to say, oh, I've never seen a deeply religious person that's good. I mean, unless this person, and maybe they do, I kind of doubt they do, but maybe they do have some sort of moral framework that they have operated on and that they have created and can relay to the world through non-religious means. And that's kind of the challenge for anyone who says, oh, well, being religious doesn't make you a good person. Well, where does your definition of good come from? How do you define what is good? Because if we're speaking what's just sort of naturally seen, 90% of what the average person's morals who don't adhere to a specific religion, where they come from, is the culture. And where do a bunch, if not most, a good plurality, but I would argue most basic morals that our society and our culture has come from Judeo-Christian values. And so even then, if you're rejecting the idea that a religious person can be good through this lens or whatever, you still have to justify what that distinction is. What is a good person? And just by the tenets of Christianity, we would say that these traits of good are directly attributes of God, and every person, whether deeply religious or not, is fallen, and they won't be perfectly good. So none of us are good people in that sense, but we can inhabit the characteristics of God, of love, of righteousness, of discipline, and self-sacrifice, these kinds of things that were emulated in Jesus Christ, and those are us, doing good things. So maybe we're not intrinsically perfectly good in that sense, but for what at least constitutes the purpose of a good human being in this discussion, a lot of deeply religious people are good people. And then if you, of course, just look through the timelines of history, this is also just a very stupid point to make, because some of the most noteworthy, generous humans in history were Christians, and they were deeply religious. William Wilberforce, who was basically the leading force that abolished the slave trade, he really was the morning star for the entire globe and the West in particular. But he abolished the slave trade in England. He did so out of his conviction for his Christianity. He did it because he was religious. You look at people like Florence Nightingale, who's absolutely generous. Mother Teresa, all of these people were deeply religious, and their acts of what this person probably would happen to consider good were informed by their faith. So it's a silly proposition, both in the formation of the question, and also if you just take it at face value, I think.
Yeah. I don't have any more to add. That was really well.
All right. We'll move to the next one then. Okay, this one I'm excited to get into.
Me
Britt and I
too.
haven't talked about this yet. So for context, it's probably been like a week or so, maybe a little longer, since the Oscars happened, and the picture winner was Everything Everywhere All at Once. And
won the most Oscars in a single award show ever.
Right. Yeah. Not only did it win Best Picture, it swept across the board. And so Matt, we've got a quote tweet from Andy Craig, who we've had featured on this, well, maybe on Cringe Posts before. He's quote retweeting Matt Walsh from the Daily Wire. So we'll start with Matt Walsh's tweet in reference to Everything Everywhere All at Once. Perhaps the worst Best Picture winner in the history of the Academy Awards. A tedious and pointless movie. Mildly amusing at certain points, but that's the absolute best thing that can be said about it. And Andy Craig quote tweets this saying, "It's an ode to family. The main plot and each of the subplots are all about husband-wife, father-daughter, mother-daughter, grandfather-granddaughter, finding the value and meaning in those relationships. There was a time that would have been a recognizably conservative theme." Before I hand it over to you, Britt, just a note: if you haven't seen the movie and you wish to preserve spoiler-free zone, I would recommend skipping ahead because we will probably be talking about spoilers here. So that is your spoiler warning.
Yes. Even with spoilers, though, I think it's a good watch. But we might disagree. I've been looking forward to this for us to talk about. I mean, I think I've mentioned on the show if you should watch this film for quite a while now.
Yes, and I finally have, so I can have an informed perspective.
All right. So I think Andy Craig's take, that's the one we're critiquing. I think it's a good one. There is a little caveat with some of the sexuality stuff within the film that I think is not recognizably conservative and is not something that I necessarily align with or find compelling. But I think, if you haven't watched the film and you don't care to watch it, I can kind of just give you a general summary. But basically, a woman who's kind of living in her mind, a less than ideal life, suddenly gains the power to see herself in every single universe that has ever existed. And there's kind of an overarching plot about saving the world and the universe and things like this within it. But as she kind of goes through each of these, she experiences feelings of I could have been an actress. I could have been a chef. My life would have been so much better if I'd done this and not married my husband or been unfaithful in this way or and whatnot. And the conclusion that she reaches at the end of the film, and what all of the relationships that she kind of evaluates, through each of these things is that, like, regardless of where you are, regardless of what type of life you live, regardless of what choices you might have made that have split you off in the different ways, like the same type of morals still hold, right? The morals of being kind, loving, faithful, caring about, the other person. And a lot of times it upholds very traditional values, which I really respect. Whether or not it conscientiously did that or not, the actual movie writers, I'm not exactly sure, but to me it didn't matter. It really affected me, and maybe it was the time in my life that I watched it. Going through a little bit of transition from startup life to a little bit more traditional and things like that. But yeah, I really enjoyed the film. I thought I think Andy Craig's a little bit off, but I think Matt Walsh is completely off. I don't think there's definitely much other worse Best Picture winners, even if you don't consider this one of the best. And yes, it is amusing, which is great, but that's not the best thing that can be said about it. There's a lot of other stuff that can be said about it as well. All right, Donnie, give me what you thought.
Yeah. Well, I think Matt Walsh's take is terrible regardless.
Yeah.
Like that, it's just so exaggerated and stupid that even if I didn't like the movie overall, I think it would be obscene to say it's the worst Best Picture winner in the history of the Academy Awards. Like, give me
Yeah.
a break. That is such a clown.
When we texted about it, you mentioned The Shape of Water, and I thought, yeah, that's
yeah, exactly. So with Andy Craig's take, I think we actually end up agreeing in the sense that he highlights things that I think are good about it, that are ostensibly conservative. But what I don't like is that Andy Craig is kind of forcing the caricature of these values onto the film and saying, since it falls into the caricature of what should be conservative, you are ridiculous for not finding it conservative. And what I mean by that is what you alluded to earlier, where it's like there are some things that are not conservative about it, like the sexual orientation thing, where the daughter is a lesbian, and there's this big sticking point early in the movie where she doesn't the parents don't want to tell the grandfather about their daughters, well, the mother specifically, about her lesbian girlfriend, because he's from the older generation who won't understand. And it's this big plot point there. And then at the end of the film, she comes around and the mom tells her dad that her daughter has a girlfriend, and it's just sort of seen as him just kind of like accepting it and being like, oh, okay. And that's shown as like the only way that it's okay. And so, one, I would say that resolving the family plot point as it's a family movie with these big override, this should be a conservative value. I think you're kind of mimicking the conservative viewpoint, which is a traditional family. And then Andy Craig is saying, look, it mimicked the traditional family in all these ways. You have to like this. So I don't like that aspect. But what I do like, that the ultimate defeat of nihilism was family, and that was seen as the most important thing, and that was pushed to the front. I did like that. But here again is something I didn't like, which is that the movie felt like it was a little shallow in the why those things mattered. So she explored all of these different realities, and she kept coming to like not feeling fulfilled or missing out on the relationship. But the antagonist of this is a version of her daughter who can experience all of the universes simultaneously, and that has driven her to nihilism. She said she's experienced every conceivable thing at every conceivable point, and so everything is meaningless because she can't feel anything. And I found myself confused because at the end, the mom, it makes this whole impassioned cry about how there's these things that she doesn't understand about her daughter, that she doesn't like. You have tattoos and I don't like that, or you do this thing and I wish you were that, but there's nowhere I'd rather be. And that's kind of this, oh yeah, family is the most important thing, but there's no why backing up the value there. There was no. I didn't feel like it gave a credible worldview as to say why these things matter, what the transcendent value is, because I just kept thinking, okay, well, the daughter existed in this universe too, and she felt these things and still thinks about nihilism. What's the transcendent value there? And so I found that even though it does have this, ode to family theme, I felt it kind of lacked the actual why that mattered. And then, just as another side note, just to wrap up, I realized I forgot to say the grandfather thing I think would have been a lot more impactful if he'd said something like, well, I'm not sure I really approve of that relationship, but I still love you, granddaughter. Because that's kind of what the mom does with the daughter, right? She's like, there are these
Yeah.
things I don't like, but I love you and accept you anyway because family's the most important thing. But of course, they had to say, oh, the grandfather's going to accept it. And that's the happy ending. They couldn't dare show that, you can be a good person and disapprove of, a homosexual relationship. They couldn't dare do that. So that made me a little annoyed.
That
But
that yeah. I don't know if I completely agree with well, I want to say I disagree. If you think of any like the literature and stories that like really captivate me, like I think of like Lord of the Rings, I think of when Pippin and Gandalf are at being besieged, and they're talking about white shores and like that's not the end and all this stuff. I mean, it's not overtly Christian, but it has to hint at something beyond, right?
right.
And I do think that this should have hinted at something beyond that in order for it to like really seal it. But you eventually end up at like, well, what is the point of all this if you don't have some other, if you don't have like, I mean, from our perspective, like a Christian worldview to tie it all together, right? Why is there something that is an eternal form that signifies something that is beautiful or right? You always, if you ask the question enough times, you eventually end up there.
Yeah.
This stopped like one question short of it being like on par with Lord of the Rings to me, if that makes sense. But I don't think that makes it shallow, and I guess that's where I disagree. It's like you eventually end up there. They might not have had the courage to ask it all the way, but I think it got further than basically most movies. I think it got as far as so another Best Picture winner was. Have you ever seen No Country for Old Men?
I haven't, but I
Oh my gosh! Well, maybe you won't like it. Maybe I can't predict it. I love that movie, man. It is so good and it has so much to say about human nature and evil. And to me, it gets about the same. Like it gets one question away from like being right at the door, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
About answering the question of like why evil exists in the world and what do you do because it's there, and eventually you get old and you can't fight it anymore. So what's the point of existing? And so that's why I like it. I think that to me, it made me think and feel something I haven't felt from cinema in a very long time. In terms of new movies that have come out, it gave me almost the same feeling as that scene in the Lord of the Rings with Pippin and Gandalf there. I was like, oh man, this is just so good.
Yeah, see, to me, like with Lord of the Rings, I think what Tolkien does so masterfully is while he's not as overt as like C.S. Lewis in Narnia or something with his allegories, it feels like every stroke of the story is painted meaningfully with that rich theological backdrop. So it's like, it's not just nihilism for nihilism's sake. Like I would say everything everywhere all at once. Nihilism is a good enemy. It's something that resonates with a modern audience, definitely. But honestly, there's not a lot explored. I mean, I would say it does an okay job exploring some aspects of nihilism. But what I think Tolkien does really well, like with the Ring, is he describes a specific sensation. He describes this complete and utterly relatable evil, and he manifests it into this thing of the ring. So he takes this complex, evocative feeling that all humanity can relate to. He distills it down into an object, and then not only does he find a way to say that there's a better answer, but I feel like he makes that answer directly applicable to the solution, to the problem.
That's fair. Yeah.
Like it's not even just like, oh look, the ring, there's the ring and then there's the white shores. It's like, no, you have to destroy the ring. And what does it take to destroy the ring? It takes a death. It takes a sacrifice. And so I feel like because he's writing from that theological angle, he has the advantage of as a story writer of having everything come in and connect it, everything everywhere all at once in the story, connect it. And then whereas everything everywhere all at once, because it doesn't have that worldview behind it, it's like we know that the things of value are relationships and family. We know these things are good and valuable.
But why?
We can't really tell you why. So instead of answering why nihilism's bad, we're just gonna say this is better than nihilism. And so it's like, yeah, that's true, and I agree with that. But because it didn't feel like everything came together to give that convincing message. The most it said is, like every universe has things to be grateful for, even be grateful for, stubbing your toe because it means you have toes to stub, or like in a universe where you have hot dogs for fingers, you get really good with your feet, things like that. And to me, that's still like, okay, but all of these are almost still Nietzschean wills to power rather than an immortal thing, because you're saying like there's still like material benefit, or there's still things that can benefit me in these different universes, which isn't a good answer to nihilism ultimately to me, when the idea of nihilism is if there is nothing beyond the will to power, then it's all meaningless. So,
Yeah, that's really good. You describe the feeling of like there's just a slight
yeah,
part of unsatisfaction right at the end
right.
of the film, and it's because of that. And they get so close so many times. Like I absolutely loved the scene where there's a universe where everyone is only rocks, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And it's like these truths, if you're a sentient rock, these truths still apply, right? And they get
Mhm.
so close to being able to like hop over that gap, but because they refuse to acknowledge something beyond themselves, right? You
Yeah.
never you don't get the full satisfaction of meaning that you could. And so you're right, it does fall short in that way. I still it's amazing movie, visually, audio, all those things. And I love I'm a sucker for kung fu too. So
Oh yeah,
I love the
absolutely.
kung fu.
Well, and I was gonna say, I think the reason why it bothered me so much is because it gets so close. Because
Yeah.
it's almost like in a movie where you have to suspend your disbelief. Like this movie, honestly, you have to suspend your disbelief in a lot of
Oh, of
ways
course.
for some of the mechanics of it, where it's like why can she do this thing now without doing that? Like I don't quite get that, but you're like, fine, I'll just kind of like suspend disbelief in these ways, and you can do that. It's not a big deal. Whereas something like I think Inception maybe bothered a lot of people because it was like it tried to articulate everything very well. It tried to set up all the rules for the universe very specifically, and then if there's like one little inconsistency, you fixate on that, right? And it bothers you a lot because everything else is so well crafted. And I think that's kind of how I feel about Everything Everywhere All at Once as far as
The
the meaning
theme.
goes,
Yeah.
because like you said, it hits so many things right that when it doesn't flip that last little switch for me, I'm fixating on it because it gets so close, but then it's missing the last sort of
Yeah.
like nail down there. So I think Matt Walsh's point is absurd and ridiculous because it in a sense is a lot deeper than other movies that try to be deep. I think it promotes a message that is more good than it is bad, which is a lot more than what you can say for for most
Yeah.
Oscar nominees or winners. Um, so Andy Craig's take is mostly right, but I also just disagree with some of the ways that he's sort of saying you have to think it's conservative in all these ways when it's not quite there.
Yeah. Matt just wanted Top Gun Maverick to win.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Great film, but not an Oscar winner.
I don't think any. I was gonna say I think I saw like Scott Walker tweet. Well, I know it has my vote. I'm like, well, yeah, but no one cares what you think, Scott Walker. Like, sorry. No one's asking you for your picture of the year. I don't think. Okay, our next tweet comes from Alpha News, and they are tweeting a quote from Minnesota Lieutenant Governor Peggy Flanagan on sex changes for minors. Quote, when our children tell us who they are, it is our job as grown-ups to listen and to believe them. That's what it means to be a good parent. What do you think, Britt?
I mean, this is absurd on every level. I need to Google. I'm not familiar with Peggy.
I'm not either.
Does she have kids? I mean, there's a chance you could hold this view if you've never had kids, none of your family has ever had kids, and you've never met a kid in your life.
that seems like a pretty reasonable place to be, right?
I don't think she has kids. Yeah, she doesn't have kids. So yeah, we've talked about this before, but I thought I was a dinosaur growing up. Like I had one time I got kind of sick and I was in the hospital for about 2 weeks for some lung stuff. And once I started feeling better, I would get out of my bed and pretend I was a dinosaur and march all around the floor trying to bite people. And if my parents were just bad people. They said, "Hey, Britt, you're not a dinosaur. You can't bite people. Like you can kind of pretend you can be a dinosaur, but you definitely can't bite people, and you need to stay in your bed and be hooked up to the IV and everything." If they were a good parent, they would have just let me, according to Peggy, wander around biting people as much. Listen to me and believe me that I'm a dinosaur. What an absolutely ridiculous statement.
Yeah. Let's try to take it at the most generous interpretation you could possibly give this absurd take, which is when our children tell us who they are, it's our jobs as grown-ups to listen. Yes, sure. And when you listen, it means engaging with them on a serious level and addressing their concerns in a reciprocal manner. So when a kid runs around saying, "I'm a dinosaur," that is a less serious position to take than when they say something like I'm
Sure.
sad. And you're like, "Oh, well, why are you sad?" I'm not just going to brush it out like, "Oh, feel better." Like, you should engage. You should deal with them in that way. But that also means you have to tie in things into reality. You have to address things appropriately. And like you said, if your parents had let you run around biting people, that wouldn't have been a good response to something that is rooted in reality, which is the fact that you can't bite people. And as much as these people want to claim otherwise, a child saying that they are another gender, you know, the vast majority of these cases aren't even real in the sense of an adult saying I feel like I'm in the wrong body, which also is a lot of social pressure versus genuine gender dysphoria or something like that. So even if you were to accept that every case of an adult saying, I'm in the wrong body, I need to transition, which is also an inflated number. But even if you were to say all of those were legitimate, the vast majority of children saying this do not end up being those people. And so it's like on the very at the very least, at the most liberal interpretation of this, it feels like it should be, it means listening and evaluating and seeing where that child's coming from, talking through them with it, and making sure that that's a genuine thing, not just accepting it carte blanche. Now, of course, I think, generally speaking, you shouldn't be encouraging your children to engage in things that of the culture, things, whether or not they're being culturally influenced. You should also be engaging with them and asking them questions and talking to them about the hard realities of, not the hard realities, but I mean the straight realities of life that exist. And so, at best, you could say that, yeah, you should talk with your child. You should listen to them. Don't brush them off. But just affirming what they say is a recipe for disaster.
Yeah, and this makes me think about like our concept around the age of consent, right? Which
Yeah.
is this entire thought process of like, well, we need to listen to our kids and believe them, like kind of throws that out of the window, right? Because if a kid says, well, I'm a 13-year-old and some 30-year-old wants to go out with me and that's what I feel like, to be a good parent, you'd have to affirm that feeling within your 13-year-old. But of course, we all know that's insane. At least for now, we all
Yeah.
know that's insane. But the reason we have the age of consent is because we recognize that children do not have fully formed brains. They're not able to fully process any decision in a way that they could see. They can process a lot of decisions, but they're not able to process every decision and what it means for their future, and in light of what it means for their future and what they actually want. And in terms of sex changes, this is really borne out when you look at the data that I think it's like 96% of kids that have feelings that they're like are supposed to be the other gender when they're growing up outgrow it by the time they're like 25, right? So by the time their brain is fully formed from a scientific standpoint, and they're able to fully make decisions in full consciousness, they grow out of this decision. So it's up to a parent, and the reason parents exist is to help make sure that kids are able to grow up in such a way that preserves most of their potential and opportunity for when they can make their own decisions with that potential and opportunity. And it's just so sad to me that on something as significant and important as what sort of parts, reproductive parts you have, the things that will probably connect you to the most meaningful experiences in your life, whether it's once you get married and you're able to be with your spouse, or the ability to create children, those are decisions that should not be touched, whether or not you want to make those decisions. Like the ability to have those things is not a decision you should be able to cut off at such an early age. You should definitely at least have, if your parent, ideally you'd also have society also helping you back that up, if not as well as medical experts and the people that are performing these procedures. So it's kind of scary to me that someone as high up as her is saying something like this. It's very 1984-esque, if you remember, like the children ratting on their parents and
Yeah.
being the
Yeah.
moral arbiters.
Well, I mean, that's also just rooted in the Hitler Youth, which was
Oh
a
yeah,
very
in
real
real
thing that
life,
happened.
yeah.
Yeah. To one of the one comparison point that you said that actually really, I think, also had me thinking, is a critical point, is the relation to like the age of consent. Well, a lot of the other reasoning besides this not fully framed, or excuse me, not fully formed, well, not besides, I'd say more like adding on to the fact that they don't have fully formed brains, is the fact that an older adult trying to come onto a young child, not only is there the manipulation of fully formed brain to not, but there's a real power play there, and there's a power dynamic of manipulation and abuse that can occur. And so, how much, how unreasonable do you think it is to say that there's a power manipulation going on for a lot of children in the culture when they're seeing TV shows that are pushing this, when there's having teachers teach that it's okay and you should do this? There's absolutely an influence and power dynamic going
Yeah.
on from the society at large in these more progressive spaces that are influencing kids in this direction. So, that's just another good comparison point to why we have age of consent laws in the current system, or why we recognize this delineation of what should or shouldn't be societally acceptable for something as life lasting and traumatic as, well, traumatic potentially, or just intimate as sexual relationship with another person. How much more is that in play when you're talking about even younger children, generally, or just young children in general, in a deeply sexual identification way, doing something that's even more irreversible in many cases.
Yeah.
And not only irreversible, but I would argue in almost no context is what's being done to them a good or healthy thing. It is always a mutilation of some form, unlike a sexual relationship where there are forms of that which can be good and healthy and right, in the right context. This kind of procedure, I would argue, is always destructive and a mutilation, never liberating and healthy.
Yep.
Okay, moving to our next tweet, we have a Women's History Month post. Is this from like ESPN? It looks like the E logo there. So
yes. Yep.
yeah, ESPN's highlighting this quote from Abby Wambach. I believe that's the pronunciation. Maybe, I'm not sure.
You never heard of her, so
Yeah, I haven't. Which is all the more poignant to this.
Yeah.
Her quote reads, "We just got the same dang award, the same sweat, the same sacrifice. Yet the three of us were walking into three very different retirements." Abby Wambach on her 2016 ESPYS Icon Award alongside Kobe Bryant and Peyton Manning. So is she a women's soccer player, a women's basketball player?
I actually have no idea, man. I didn't even look her up, because the fact that I didn't know who this was is representative of why she is walking into a different retirement than Kobe Bryant and Peyton Manning. So for those of you who don't know, the reason sports players, or not even the reason, the way sports make money is through advertising and through notoriety. So if someone knows who this is, wants to watch them, wants to watch Kobe Bryant, wants to watch the Lakers play because they're the best basketball players ever, it brings eyes, and eyes generate ad revenue and generate millions and millions of dollars of ad revenue. I think the NBA is like $11 billion with a B worth of ad revenue and ticket revenue and all that stuff. So eyes are what generate money. The fact that you and I don't know who Abby Wambach is, how to pronounce her last name, what sport she even plays, just shows that most people don't actually watch this, and therefore it's not the same type of revenue, right? We've talked about the WNBA and how they actually are subsidized. Like the entire salary actually of the women's basketball league is subsidized by the men's league. So yeah, let's even just simple this down to like trench digging, right? Like there's some sport in trench, not even sports in trench digging. You're hired to dig a trench from point A to point B. And instead of digging from point A to point B, you dig from point A to point Z. So you dig backwards, and someone else actually digs from point A to point B. They might be the same distances away, but you have not created anything of value. You've not generated anything. No one is going to pay you for digging a trench in the opposite direction of the direction that you were supposed to. You might have sweated as much. You might have even dug more dirt, moved more dirt than the other person did, but you did something that wasn't worth as much. And that's what Abby is unfortunately running into right here. And have you ever seen Bill Burr's Red Rocks comedy special?
I don't think I think I've seen clips. I've never seen the
Okay.
full thing.
He has this hilarious thing. He's like, look, men are easy to please. We want to watch football. We'll sit on the couch and watch football. And women get mad at us and all this stuff that that women's sports are not being watched. But it's like, hey, if it's women's sports, why aren't the women watching it?
Yeah, yeah.
And it's because, well, women don't generally enjoy watching sports. Men want to watch men's sports. And it's just like, well, that's just how it is, right? It's like, it's if women could figure out how to make their sports as interesting to watch as a man's sport, then great. Like, men would probably watch that. And I brought this point up before. I mean, UFC and MMA, like women's stuff, is almost as popular as the men's, right? Like the co-main event, sometimes the main event are headlined by women in it, and they're enjoyed just as much as the men's side because it's entertaining. It's a demonstration of skill that is equal because it's women against women most of the time. So yeah, when you see ad revenue being generated at equal amounts, generally the pay is also the same.
Yeah, I mean, even I was gonna say, even in general, just the interest of individuals and the interest of the events is what matters more than anything. I was thinking about a chess boxing event that was put on at the end of last year. It was a live streamed thing.
Did you watch it?
Oh yeah, because it was a lot of online creators and content creators put together, and it was really is interesting. A lot of people I did or didn't know, but one of the most watched, one of the most highlighted. It wasn't technically the highlight, but I think for most people watching the thing was the women's card between two chess. I think I can't remember one's a grandmaster. I don't think the other one was, but they're both very high grand chess people up there and doing the chess boxing thing. And it's like, was that entertaining because it was the women's card, or was it entertaining because each of them had leading up to the event really like put on dramatics for the rivalry, for the beef, for the hype of it. And it was absolutely that. Like, sure, it's cool that it was the women's card, but that's not, I wasn't like, oh, now it's the women's card, that's why I'm tuning in. It was because they did their job of making an entertaining build up to make, and the actual fight and chess games were phenomenal to watch. So like the entertainment value was there, and it has nothing to do with the fact that they were or weren't women. It has to do with how they
Yeah.
advertised the event leading up to get interest, and then how they carried out during the event when the eyes were on them, and they did phenomenal. And now, I have no doubt that either of those two people, if they take place in future events, they're automatically going to get larger audiences, and that's how sporting events work. The more eyes you bring, either by drumming up notoriety for yourself or for your team or for the sport as a whole, if you can do that and make sure, like, oh, you gotta catch this women's sports team in that way, then you're going to get more eyes, and that's great. And if you underperform and you don't make an entertaining thing to watch, then, and you don't have people invested, then you're just not going to make as much money. I was wondering, like, what in her mind is this distinction? Like, does she think, for instance, that it's like people want to watch sports games in relation to the proportion of how good things are, or do people want to watch sports games based on just how good they are total? Like, for instance, if a basketball player can do something that is extremely impressive, say it's a women's basketball team, she can outperform my local team that I play on with my friends. They can outperform me by 3 times. Like, wow, that's really cool proportion to how well I can do. I should be entertained watching that, right? Well, if the men's basketball team can do 10 times what our team can do, I'm not thinking I'm interested equally in watching teams that perform better than me. I just want to watch what's the best basketball out there. And to kind of illustrate that point, and maybe this isn't a fair, accurate or accurate comparison point to make, so correct me if I'm wrong, because I'm not super familiar with the sports scene, but like, if you look at the revenue from like college football, the average college football, you're getting about like 3.19 million per school per year. And I think the NFL just like blows that out of the water, right? I was gonna say their total 2021 revenue was like 17.19 billion for the NFL or whatever. So it's like, the average college football team is way better than the average football team that plays casually, but people aren't going to pay as much to watch that as they are like the top professionals. And the reason why college football is popular is because people have loyalty to those teams. So there's an external reason why you have attention being drawn to that. if you wake up and society has no more attachments to their colleges anymore, like there's not this college pride thing going on, you'd probably see the viewership for college football, college sports in general, drop off massively. But there's an external reason why people want to watch that. And so maybe women can, these women who are mad that there isn't more people watching their channels, maybe they can make the fact that they're women that external draw for some people. I just don't think it's going to be a big enough draw for the majority of people who are watching sports, because most people tend to prioritize things like interesting games and high level play to the max. Whether or not it's good level play, they just want to see the highest level play.
Yep.
Okay, and we will close out with this last take from frequent guest of the show, if only in post form, Joe Walsh. Joe tweets, it was a once in a lifetime pandemic. Of course mistakes were going to be made. Of course. But to believe the scientists and healthcare officials all purposely tried to try to heck with our lives is crazy. They did their best to help us through something none of us had ever lived through before. What do you think, Britt?
It's a terrible take. It's just oh, it's so bad. I overheard a conversation the other day, and someone was talking about vaccines and stuff for infants and things like that. And this person said something to the tune of and they had their life saved from cancer, but said something to the tune of, well, my life was saved by modern medicine, so I just trust whatever they are going to do, and I think anyone who doesn't is kind of dumb. And I wanted to say, this wasn't my conversation to be a part of, but I wanted to say, it's like, well, do you know what the third leading cause of death is in the United States? It's medical malpractice and medically misassigned drugs, right? So almost 500,000 people every year die due to a mistake made by a doctor, whether intentional or unintentional, as well as drugs that were assigned to them that shouldn't have been assigned to them in the first place. So it's the third leading cause of death. That's not if you include things like cancers that are caused by medications. Like my father's cancer very likely was caused by a type of medication that he was on that the doctors assigned to him, or from the fact that we don't recommend healthy lifestyles for heart disease, which is the second leading cause of death. And so, medical professionals make mistakes, yet our culture has venerated them in such a way that they have this superiority and almost God complex. It's like, well, we know things, and you with Google, with access to all research that has ever existed ever in time, basically, you don't stand a chance against, because I went to school for 12 years or whatever. It's like, no, you're a human. You make mistakes. You might know more about your specific field, but that doesn't make you an expert on everything and every single trade-off that could potentially happen. And this arrogance that these people had led to them. The thought that they couldn't make mistakes led them to make recommendations that shut us in our homes, that actually led to increase in obesity, that is going to have crazy health outcomes over the next 5 to 10 years that I think are going to outweigh COVID. And honestly, we're seeing a lot of that happen already now. We knew that mistakes would be made. You and I knew mistakes were going to be made. That's why we said, hey, maybe we should let people make their own decisions, because there's not a single person that can make an error-free call at the scale of shutting everyone, 400 million people in their homes, at a time. Go for it.
Yeah, no, well, I was going to say absolutely. And that's the first aspect where of his tweet that's wrong, right? So if we take what you said there, right? Like, you and I know, like, people are going to make mistakes. So let's not mandate people to do things like that. So best case scenario, you're saying, oh, well, mistakes were made and locking people down in their homes was just one of those mistakes. Wrong. Locking down people in their homes was purposely messing with our lives. Even if they thought that it was doing the right thing, that was purposely messing with our lives. So Joel Walsh, you're wrong there, number one. Number two, don't let people gaslight you on this. We have documents, internal documents from I think it was the CEO of Moderna. I don't remember if it was him or if it was Pfizer. But one of the big vaccine companies circulating before they made all these mandates saying, like, oh, we know that this vaccine won't actually help reduce transmission or receiving. Is it okay to keep going? They're like, it's okay, just keep making these claims about like that it's gonna reduce transmission, all these kinds of things. So vaccine mandates were put in place, even though the CEOs of these, with these, at the highest levels, knew that it was not going to help reduce transmissibility or either way. We have documents in Washington State that showed, for instance, things like masks were shown to, I think it was masks. It was either masks or no, I think it was also the vaccine. Never mind.
Yep.
The vaccine was not effective at reducing transmission. Yes, because because they gave an example of internal emails sent to the governor's office directly about a party that was a we all are vaccinated party. They all went, and then someone caught COVID right
Not just
after.
like
from that.
almost all of them caught
Yes.
COVID. Yeah.
Right. So they knew that, and then still implemented their vaccine mandate policies. So even if you don't accept the first one as locking down as a purposely messing with our lives, it doesn't matter because they knew better and they still purposely messed with our lives. The gaslighting is crazy. I think I mentioned to you, but I don't know if I said on the show. I was chatting with someone online who's a smart dude. We don't agree on everything. He's not like a mindless ideologue. He is someone who puts in work and thinks for himself for the most part. And we were going back and forth generally about whether or not, if a conglomerate of people all agree on something in academia and like journalists and stuff, whether or not that makes you more or less skeptical. Because he was talking about economists saying how like 94% of economists agree that the gold standard wouldn't help certain things. And I was like, well, that's not a very convincing argument, because if 94% of people agree on something, I become more skeptical of it. Yeah. 94% of scientists agreed that it was definitely not a COVID lab leak. And his response is, well, are you talking about sensationalized media or talking heads? Because I believe that was true, but I wouldn't. I highly doubt you could find a peer-reviewed paper that discredited the lab leak theory. First search result that I find that of from back in the two, I can't remember if it was 2020 or 2021, but I did a Google search of the time period there, and it was like the first one I found that I opened, peer-reviewed article condemning the lab leak theory. So don't let people gaslight you, either intentionally or unintentionally. These people knew better, and they purposely tried to manipulate the world. They manipulated the globe, and they did try to mess with your lives. Whether or not it was for good reasons doesn't really matter. They did, and that's immoral regardless of their reasons. They could say that they're trying to be the most what's the term, but I'm forgetting the dictator. Anyway,
benevolent.
Benevolent. They could have been trying to be the most benevolent dictators, and that's still the most dangerous thing and immoral thing to do. Trying to, as C.S. Lewis says, the most dangerous tyrant's the one who's trying to do it for your own good.
That's all good, and I think intention, right? One, we've already established, it doesn't really matter if you're going to wield your power in such a way that like ruins people's lives, and if you ruin it and there's a little bitty chance that you could be wrong, it's like you probably shouldn't do that, right? Like it's a lot. The arguments about the vaccine were like, hey, if an employer is going to force you to take a vaccine, they should also be liable for whatever side effects occur from that vaccine. Or else they shouldn't be forcing you to take it. The other aspect of it too is, his last line is, they did their best to help us through something none of us had ever lived through before. Well, if none of us had ever lived through something like this before, and I guess this is somewhat unprecedented, but if none of it, shouldn't all voices be, all credible voices, shouldn't they be heard? Shouldn't they have something to offer? Because we're just trying to see through the mist. We're trying to understand what's going on. And if we don't know what's going on, then like, people that are experts should all be talking to each other. Dissenting opinions that are against the orthodoxy are not actually against the orthodoxy, because there are no orthodox opinions, because this has never happened before. Yet they went and they tried to ban people like the people that signed on to the Great Barrington Declaration. I think like 64,000 or something, or maybe it was 6,400. One of the two, order of magnitude difference, but thousands of scientists and doctors, all that had really high credentials in this field, in related fields, said, hey, we shouldn't be locking people in their homes. If you've never lived through this before and you're trying to do your best, if Fauci is agonizing and losing sleep all night because he's like, I can't figure this out because we've never been through this before, you would want to hear those people out. And if they are wrong and you disagree with them, at least address them, right? At least have some sort of point to make against their point about why you're not proceeding. But we get the exact opposite, right? We get Dr. Fauci and Francis Collins calling for these people to be, basically crucified in the media, to be censored on Twitter, have basically their entire careers, dragged through the mud and discredited. That's not someone trying to do their best to see through the haze. That's someone that has a clear agenda.
Absolutely right. Couldn't put it better myself. Unless you have any last thoughts, I think we're good. All right, perfect. Well, thank you guys for listening to this episode. As a reminder, if you want to give us a subscription, a like, share, all that good stuff, it helps us out a ton. And we will catch you on the next one. Take care.